Like how? What do you mean?
I mean, I never thought the zombies would be living people. I thought they'd be dead people.
What in the hell are you talking about? I asked him.
I run a website on zombies, he said, like it was the most natural thing in the world. LivingDead.com. It's a big deal on the web, and in philosophical circles, too. There's a group of us that usually do the discussion groups, and we talk about all kinds of zombies. I got into it because of the philosophical issues they raise. Zombies raise all kinds of issues about consciousness. The biggest one, of course, is about the existence of consciousness itself. Why do we have it? Do I have any way of knowing if other people have consciousness? That kind of thing. I stared at him for a long moment, trying not to lose my temper. Finally I said, "People are dying out there, Mr. Stoller. This isn't a bunch of geeks on the web talking about consciousness or whatever you people do. This is people dying. My wife and child are out there somewhere." "Hey, wait," he said, showing me the palms of his hands. "I'm not making light of this. I know it's not a game out there. I'm just saying, that's all. Just thinking out loud."
"Sure," I said. "If you'll excuse me, I'm going to check out the rest of this place." I left him and made my rounds through the station. All the doors were secure, and none of the windows were large enough for the zombies to break through. From what I saw, they didn't seem able to climb very well, and the window we had broken out was above eye level. The station had several phones, and I tried them all. None of them worked. One of the phones was in the station commander's office. Evidently, even he had been forced out into the field in a hurry because his sport coat was still hanging on a peg on the wall. I brushed up against it on my way out of his office, and when I did, I heard what sounded like his keys jangling in one of the pockets. Out of curiosity, I went through it and found his personal keys. One of them said Chevy on it. I had seen a maroon Chevy step-side in the parking lot behind the station, and I thought there was a pretty good chance the keys went to that truck. I put the keys in my pocket. When I searched the rest of his coat, I found a cell phone in the breast pocket. It didn't seem very likely, but I flipped it open and dialed April's cell phone. I pressed send and put it up to my ear, not expecting anything. When it actually started ringing, I got so excited I nearly dropped the phone. The ringing took forever. 1 ring, 2, 3. "Come on," I prayed out loud. "Come on, April. Answer." I heard a click on the other end. "Hello? Hello? April? It's Eddie."
"Eddie?"
She was talking through waves of static.
"Eddie, is that you?"
"Sweetie, it's me. Are you okay?"
"Eddie, what's going on? The TV said—"
"It's real, sweetie, it's all real." The ocean of white noise between us roared. "April! April! Are you there?"
"Where are you, Eddie? Are you okay?"
"I'm fine, April. I'm okay. I'm gonna come home as soon as I—"
"The TV said—"
The rest was static. "April! Are you there?"
"There were sick people all over the city."
"April, stop. I need you to listen to me. I need you to stay away from everybody. Don't go outside. Don't go near the windows or anything like that, okay? Don't let anybody inside, even if you know them. My other pistol is in the closet in that blue bag, remember? Remember how I taught you to use it? I need you to get that gun and keep out of sight, okay? Can you hear me, April?" There was nothing on the other end. I wasn't even getting static anymore. I tried calling again and again and again, more times than I could count, but the phone wouldn't send. In a rage, I threw it against the wall and broke it all to pieces. Ken appeared in the doorway just in time to have the debris whistle past his ear.
"Whoa," he said, backing up. "What did you do that for?"
"Get bent." He looked at the pieces all over the floor.
"Did that work?"
"Yeah."
"And you broke it?"
I didn't answer him. Instead, I sat down in the station commander's chair and simmered in my rage. I was hoping desperately that April had heard enough to remember the Springfield Armory .45 automatic I kept in the closet. She hated guns, always had, but I was hoping she would remember it and use it if she needed it. "We could have used that phone," Ken said. "That was my wife," I said. "Yeah, but—" "Mr. Stoller, in all those little powwows you and your buddies have on your website, did any of you ever stop to consider the human side of it? Did it ever dawn on you that every zombie wandering around out there equals a wasted life? I'm not dealing in philosophy, Mr. Stoller. I have a wife and a 6-month-old son out there. That's not philosophy. That's humanity." He looked like he wanted to respond, but thought better of it. "What are you going to do now?" he asked. "I'm leaving," I said. "I have to find my family." "You're leaving? What about the rest of us? What are we supposed to do?" "I don't really care," I said. "Maybe you could discuss the philosophical existence of consciousness." "Officer Hudson, please." "What are you complaining for?" I said. I was being nasty and I knew it. I didn't care. "This place is secure. You've got food, you've got a TV. When the phones come up, you'll have those too." "Yeah, but we'll be stuck here." "No, you won't. I'll leave you the truck. I'm taking that Chevy parked out back." As far as I was concerned, the conversation was over. I didn't want to hear anything else from Ken Stoller. I walked out of the office, down the hallway, and was 5 steps from the door when Octavio came bounding down the stairs in a rush of knees and elbows, yelling at me in Spanish and pointing back up the stairs. I thought I heard the word baño, and I knew that meant bathroom, but there was no calming him. I tried to hold him there and get him to slow down, but he broke away from me and ran back to the kitchen, yelling the whole way. There was a light on at the top of the stairs, but the stairs themselves were dark. I looked back at Ken, and he shrugged, but I saw fear in his eyes. I pulled my gun and started up. As I mounted the steps, I felt something sticky beneath my boots. I shined my light on the stairs and saw a long smear of blood leading up to the landing. I took a deep breath and kept going. Chapter 9. There was a puddle of blood at the top of the stairs and a long black smear leading down a corridor to the right. I kept my gun up, working the corners to maximize cover, and followed the blood trail into the locker room. The locker room was at the far back corner of the 2nd floor, and I knew there was no other way out. Whatever it was, I was about to meet it face to face. The blood trail led into the bathroom. The floor was white tile, and the black blood glistened against it like a poorly made brushstroke. The smell made me want to vomit. I passed the banks of urinals and turned the corner into the showers, my finger on the trigger ready to fire. There, propped against the back wall in a puddle of his own blood, was Carlos. He had pulled his bandage off and tossed it aside. His eyes were cloudy white, but streaked with crimson. They were vacant and sunken into his face like pits. The barrel of his gun was resting across his chest. I lowered my gun. "What are you doing up here?" He didn't seem to hear me. "Carlos?" His hand and his gun fell from his chest and hit the tile beside him. He still held it loosely. "What are you doing, Carlos?" "Did you come up here to stop me?" His voice shook me. It was coming out of his lungs that, even as we spoke, were filling with blood. "What can you say to stop me?" He was right, of course. There was nothing I could say. I had no idea what kind of pain he was in, and it wasn't fair for me to judge him for wanting to put it behind him. It still horrified me, though. "Are you gonna say—" "No," I said quickly. "No. I won't stop you or say anything." I watched him roll his eyes to the ceiling. His chest rose and fell with the pain of breathing. "Carlos," I said softly, "I'm so sorry." He coughed hard. "There's nothing to be sorry for," he said. "You didn't bite me." "That's not what I meant. I'm sorry that you're hurting and I can't do anything for you. I don't know anything about how to use this stuff around here." He coughed again, and black bits of his lungs landed in his lap. He looked down at the pieces of himself and moaned horribly. I didn't know how to comfort him, and I felt like all I was doing was making his last moments painfully public. But at the same time, I don't think he wanted me to leave. He wanted to talk, to say anything, just to keep his hold on his humanity for a little while longer. I lowered my eyes to the tile, feeling like an idiot. He needed to hear something from me, something that acknowledged his humanity, but I couldn't think of anything that made sense.
Eddie?
What is it, Carlos?
I'm really scared. I don't want this to happen. I want to hold my son again.
I know, Carlos. I'm sorry.
I'm going to miss hearing people speak, he said. I'm going to miss the sound of words.
Carlos, I don't know what to say. I wish I could say something to make this all better, but I can't.
It's fine,
he said, and let his chin fall to his chest. He was quiet for a long time after that. Finally he said,
Did you call your wife?
Yes.
Is she okay?
Yes, I think so. She's scared.
And Matthew?
What? Matthew was his son's name.
You have a boy, right?
Yes, I think he's fine, too.
I have a son.
I know. I've seen his picture.
Yeah. I'd like to see him. Can you get it for me? In my wallet.
I nodded quietly and got his wallet out of his back pocket. There was a picture of his wife and his son, and I took it out and put it in his hands. He looked down at it and coughed. His chin sank into his chest, and I saw his whole body deflate as the breath left his body. For a moment, I thought he was gone. But then his eyes flew open and he screamed, or tried to, anyway. It turned to liquid in his throat. He was panting heavily. I had my finger wrapped around my trigger, the gun tucked out of sight behind me just in case he turned before he got what he wanted to say out. When at last he settled into a series of shallow breaths, he said,
Do you know what's so scary about dying like this?
I shook my head. My finger fell off the trigger.
I'm losing my mind. I mean, I'm really losing it. I can't think.
It's the pain. I know it hurts.
No, not the pain. It's the forgetting, the not feeling anything.
Carlos, I
have a wife.
I know.
But I don't know her. I don't remember her. I can't even think of her name. I try to think of her, and I don't see anything in my mind. There's nothing there. It's just a blank space and nothing else. I know I'm supposed to love her, but I don't remember love or pain or any of it. My son. Don't tell him I couldn't remember his name.
I won't.
I won't have a soul, will I?
There was no use in me saying anything. Nothing I could say could reach him anymore. He was becoming a shell.
Leave me alone,
he said, suddenly sounding lucid again. What are you going to—
Leave me one bullet.
Carlos,
hurry.
He coughed several times, hard.
Please.
I hurried. I took the magazine from his gun and checked to make sure there was one in the chamber. Okay, I said as I helped him put his fingers around the grip. I had to help him lift it to his mouth. It took 2 hands, it was so heavy.
Okay,
he said. I'll be outside. I turned and walked away. Just around the corner I stopped and waited and listened. I flinched when the gun went off. The sound of it reverberated so loudly in the shower stall I thought it would split the floor under my feet. My head fell back against the wall and I let the tears fall freely. When I caught my breath, I wiped my nose across the back of my arm and went back to his body. He was dead. The gun was down by his side, and his head rested peacefully against the wall. His mouth was slightly open in a mock expression of surprise, but there was very little blood on the wall behind him. I was surprised by that. It almost looked clean. I kneeled down in front of him and wondered how something so awful could have happened. None of it made sense. I heard footsteps on the tile floor coming up behind me. Fast, hurried footsteps. I didn't bother to turn around. It was the gardener Octavio. His voice was soft, apologetic. "Senor?" "Get out," I said in a hoarse whisper, turning my head only slightly in his direction. "Senor?" "God damn it," I said, spinning around and stabbing my gun at him. "Get out, get out, get the hell out of here!" On his face was tenderness. There was no sign of fear in it, only grace. He looked beyond me to Carlos and crossed himself. Then he turned and walked away, and left me with my gun pointing at nothing. Chapter 10. I closed his eyes with the palm of my hand. There was nothing I could do for the body. It would have to stay there until the world was back on its rails, and that looked to be a long ways off from where I was standing. Besides, my own family was out there somewhere, and they needed me. But I was also thinking about his wife and son, not knowing whether he was alive or dead. At least I had been able to talk to my wife. The cruel change that killed Carlos had robbed him of even that kindness. I took the gun from Carlos's hand. The slide was still locked back in the empty position. I collected all the remaining ammunition and divided the bullets evenly between our two guns. It worked out to 14 rounds apiece. I took his driver's license out of his wallet and slipped it into my gun belt. His address wasn't far from the station. Downstairs, the others were sitting in the break room, around a cheap plywood card table. Ken was over by the sink, watching me warily. When I walked into the room, they all stopped talking and stiffened nervously. I probably looked a little crazy. I'm sure Octavio told them what he had seen upstairs in the shower. I didn't try to change their minds. I put the gun on the table so that one of them could grab it. "There's a gun for you. Una pistola. And here are the keys to your truck. Sus llaves para la troca. You've got 14 bullets for the gun. I don't know how to say bullets in Spanish. I'm sorry. Lock the door behind me when I leave. Or go somewhere else, I don't care." With that, I walked away. None of them said anything to me. They just watched me walk out the door and into the night. Ken followed me out to the parking lot. "Officer Hudson," he said. His voice sounded winded. "Officer Hudson, wait, please." I slowed, but kept walking. He caught up with me. "Officer Hudson, where are you going?" "I told you," I said. "I'm going to find my family. I'm not staying here." "You can't leave us." "We've already had this conversation," I said. "You're as safe here as anywhere." "But the other officer. Did you—" "No." "But I heard a shot." "He did it himself."
"Oh." I got to the truck and unlocked it. The inside looked like crap. There were empty soda cans and fast food wrappers and packs of cigarettes everywhere. It smelled like stale smoke and sweat. The dashboard was blistered and cracked from years of exposure to the South Texas sun. I swept all the trash off the seat and climbed in. "Officer," Ken said, "I don't want to stay here. I want to keep moving. That's the best way to stay alive." "I'm not taking you anywhere," I said. "I'm going to pick up Carlos's family and then my family. Nowhere else." "That's fine," he said. "Just as long as I don't have to get boxed in somewhere." "Suit yourself," I said, and waited with the truck in gear for him to climb in. He wrinkled his nose at the smell and had to push his glasses back up. "This is the station commander's truck?" "Yep," I said, and peeled out of the parking lot. He held onto the door as we turned onto the road.
You'd think a high-ranking firefighter like a station commander could afford something better than this. He was bouncing all over the seat. It runs, I said. That's all that counts. Carlos's address was on the near west side. It was pretty close to downtown, but still on the west side of Jewett Street, which serves as the boundary line between the west and downtown divisions. Most of the neighborhoods west of Jewett were rough, but the families there tried to keep their homes in good shape. They mowed their grass and planted trees and had contracts with termite companies. But the people on the east side of Jewett had given up a long time ago. In the old days, those streets had been the heroin capital of San Antonio. My district was just a couple of miles north of Carlos's neighborhood, and I used to make calls on both sides of Jewett when the downtown guys were getting hammered with calls. I knew the area well enough so I was able to stay away from the high-traffic areas and still make pretty good time. I rolled the windows down and let the breeze cool my head. Carlos's death upset me in a way I couldn't really understand. He and I were never really anything more than passing acquaintances, yet I felt his absence like I was missing someone I had known and cared about for years. I couldn't see any lights, and I found my thoughts mirrored by the uncertain darkness surrounding me. Almost directly overhead, the clouds were backlit with moonlight and shined like wet pewter. On the horizon, the clouds were tinged with a dull orange and streaked through with charcoal scars. Ken saw me watching the darkened houses slip past and said, "I'm sorry about your friend." "Thanks," I said, not really wanting to talk with him. "I mean it," he said. "I know you don't think I understand. After what I said earlier, I mean. But I do. I do understand." We passed two men on their knees who were eating a body they had ripped apart. They looked up as we drove by, blood and gore oozing from their lips. "I lost somebody too," he said. "Yeah?" He nodded. "That zombie I told you about? That one I tied up back at the school?" "I remember." His glasses were hanging on the tip of his nose, but he didn't touch them. He looked down at his lap and took a breath. "Her name was Margaret Sewell. She was a teacher at the school." "Were you guys—" "No," he said quickly. "Nothing like that. I would have liked us to be, but I never got the nerve to ask her out." "I'm sorry," I said. "Thanks." And then it was his turn to look out the window. We drove on for a little while, dodging crowds when we saw them, staying away from traffic jams, and we talked about the zombies. "You basically have three kinds of zombies," he said. "At least that's how we divide them up on my website. You got the Hollywood zombies, like in the movies, though sometimes people call those Pittsburgh zombies because that's where Night of the Living Dead was made. They're dead people that have been reanimated somehow. Next, you've got the Haitian voodoo zombies. Those are living people who have had their free will stolen by a witch doctor. They're used as slaves, primarily. Some argue that the Hollywood zombie is just an extension of the Haitian voodoo zombie, but I don't think so. The reason I got into talking about zombies, though, is because of the philosophical kind. They're mainly a thought experiment that philosophers use to talk about consciousness. It's really just a sexy version of the classic other minds problem, but I think it's a really cool way of stating the problem. How do I know I'm not the only being in the universe with consciousness? That sort of thing. I turned off the street we had been driving down because of a large crowd and said, "But I thought you said we were dealing with a virus." "I still think we are," he said. "I'm just telling you about the website. These people walking around here don't really fit into any of the categories I mentioned." "So what's your take on them?" "Well, first off, these people are all still alive. A lot of the hard questions would go away if they were dead. Some of the hard questions, anyway. You'd still have to deal with the religious implications of reanimated corpses, but as it is right now, those zombies are going to raise a lot of legal issues for people such as yourself." "Questions like what?" "Well, they all revolve around the issue of consciousness. How much of it do those people have left? If they have any degree of it, then we have to ask if they're culpable for attacking the living. Can you arrest a zombie or even a near zombie for eating somebody?
And what about the living? The people who aren't infected? Obviously it's self-defense if they shoot a zombie who's trying to eat them, but what about all the thousands of zombies that are just wandering around unable to find somebody to eat? Do we shoot them because they might attack us? Do we have an obligation to contain them and try to find a cure for this virus? Do we take the utilitarian approach and kill them all before they have a chance to spread the virus to the rest of the world? I almost laughed at him. Is that the kind of thing you guys discuss on your website? Well, yeah. Those are all valid issues. Sounds like something for the courts to decide, I said. Maybe the military. I'm just a cop. I enforce the law, I don't make it. But that's not really true, is it? He turned to me and pushed his glasses back in place. It made him look like a fat little cherub. As a cop, you're on the front lines of morality. The really important details, the freedoms we have, or had, as Americans, are decided in the blink of an eye by men and women like you on every street in the country. When you're called to act, you do it based on your training, sure, but you also act on your own personal standard of what's right and wrong. I hope you live through this, Eddie, I really do. I hope your family lives through this, and I hope you realize that what you do in the next few days and weeks will go beyond mundane legal issues like search and seizure. It's going to be about life and death, about humanity, as you put it. You really like talking about this stuff, don't you? Of course, he said. And what better vehicle for it than the zombie? Imagine it, a being caught between life and death, deciding issues of life and death for the rest of us. There's a sort of poetic symmetry in that, don't you think? As he was talking, I watched a man pull a woman's leg off her body with his teeth and start to eat on the thigh. I looked for the poetic symmetry. He didn't notice, though. He was on a roll. There's more, of course, than just the philosophical side of it. I think a virus is causing this, like I told you, and that means we have to ask how it's spread. Transmission of bodily fluids is the most likely culprit. Blood, for example. But obviously a bite will do it too. Maybe even a scratch if the fingernail doing the scratching has the virus on it. But how do you suppose he got out of Houston? From what it looked like on the TV, this is happening in a lot of places. I don't know yet, he said. That's something to look into later, for sure. But there are precedents, you know. The Black Death was spread by fleas on rats, and Typhoid Mary showed how a single infected person could start an epidemic. Maybe it's fleas or ticks, or a combination of insects. Fleas and mosquitoes, maybe. That didn't sit well with me. I could shoot a zombie if I had to. Hell, I could shoot a whole army of them if I had to. But I couldn't shoot a flea. Any idea why it formed? The virus, I mean? Well, that's the question of the day, isn't it? Could be any number of factors. Unsanitary conditions in the wake of the Houston hurricanes, probably. Who knows, though? Maybe it's not even a virus. Maybe it's a bacteria. A superbacterium brought on by doctors overprescribing antibiotics. So what you're saying is you have absolutely no clue? Basically, yeah. This is just me talking. One of the things that might help us, though, is the issue of cross-species contamination. Like zombie cats and dogs? Exactly. He said it triumphantly, like he'd just won a convert to his cause, whatever that was. Although I was going to come back to the issue of consciousness. Suppose it's a virus that somehow thrives on the complex functions of the human mind. Another way of looking at it would be that it eats the mind away. Like Alzheimer's disease. Unfortunately, yes. Only this virus would work much faster. In hours instead of years. And when it's done with the mind, it eats the body. Can a virus do that? I don't know. Maybe. We'll be able to say more if there are incidents of cross-species contamination. That would tell us how much of a mind you have to have in order to lose it. Are there zombie dolphins out in the Gulf of Mexico? Are there zombie chimps in the zoo or zombie killer whales in SeaWorld? That would be something, I said. I wonder if a zombie whale would remember to come up for air. Interesting, he said. Definitely food for thought. I saw a man moving quickly down the street.
There was a good-sized group behind him, and they were obviously all zombies. I slowed down to check on the man, thinking he was running from the others. I leaned over to Ken's side of the truck and called out to him through the open window. "You okay?" I asked. He stopped near the front tire on Ken's side and wheeled around to face us. The side of his face was one continuous wound, from his ear all the way down to his shoulder. "Oh, crap," Ken said. "Go, Eddie, go." I didn't give him a chance to move any closer. I pointed the truck down the road and gunned it. "Why did you do that?" Ken asked. "I thought he was, not a zombie." "You couldn't tell from the way he was walking?" "No. You mean you could?" He just shook his head and we drove on in silence. Ken watched the destruction with pity in his eyes, and it looked like he was adding up the human toll. "Eddie," he said, his tone suddenly very serious. "What are we doing?" "We're going to pick up Carlos's wife and child. Then we're going to pick up my family." "Are you sure this is the right thing to do? I mean, how do you know his family is still safe? Look at all this. The outbreak has hit this place hard." "I didn't ask you to come along," I said. But what I didn't say was that I had been wondering the same thing. I wondered what in the hell I hoped to accomplish by going to Carlos's family and telling them he was dead. What could I possibly say to her? "Yes, your husband's really dead." How do I know? Well, you see, I held the gun so he could shoot himself. No, it was painless, I promise. And yes, he did ask about you. Sort of, anyway. I turned it over in my head, thinking about how to say it. But everything I could think of sounded equally cruel and inadequate. And yet, for all that, I didn't turn the truck around. I kept going, driving and thinking about gunfire. The muzzle flash caught the corner of my eye. I recognized the high metallic pop of a small-caliber pistol, and I locked up the brakes. I slid the truck to a stop, and I jumped out, looking around for the shooter and whatever he was shooting at. Ken jumped out behind me. "What are you doing?" he said. "Get back in the truck." "Gunfire," I said back to him. "That means somebody back there has a gun. Maybe they can help us." "Don't be stupid, Eddie. Let's get out of here." "This first," I said. "Fine," he said. "But I'm not staying." "What?" I was already in the yard. He never left the street. Before I could stop him, he jumped in the truck, threw it in gear, and peeled out down the street, leaving me in a cloud of acrid smoke. I screamed for him to come back, but of course he didn't. I couldn't believe it. The bastard left me alone and exposed just like that. No warning, no nothing. Just then I heard another gunshot, and that snapped my attention back to the houses behind me. There were no zombies that I could see. I pulled my gun and started slowly toward the spot where I saw the flash. "Police!" I said. Silence. "Police!" I said again. "Can you hear me?" I inched my way around the back corner of the house, ready to fire. There was an officer standing in the backyard with his back to me. In front of him was a patrol sergeant and two other men, and they had that zombie look in their eyes. There were two other bodies face down in the grass. The officer with his back to me spun around and nearly shot me. "Stop!" I said. "It's me, Eddie Hudson." He didn't say anything, but I recognized him. His name was Arguello, from the downtown division. It looked like he had been through hell. His shirt was torn at the shoulder, so I could see his body armor and T-shirt, and he was covered in dust. When I looked at his face for some indication that he recognized me, I saw his cheeks were streaked with tears. "Step aside," I said, and dodged around him to fire at the zombies behind him. The one in front changed direction when he saw me. I fired once at his forehead and put him down. Then I turned to the zombie in the sergeant's uniform. But I never got the chance to fire. Before I could pull the trigger, Arguello tackled me from the side and slammed me to the ground, so hard it knocked the wind out of me. I broke contact with him when we hit the ground and rolled away. He came after me, scrambling to keep me from getting to my feet. I slapped at him as I rolled away, but he had the jump on me, and he was stronger and faster than me, too. He was able to kick my legs out from under me and push me face down in the dust. He held me there. "What the hell are you doing?" I said. "Let me up." He didn't answer. I struggled to turn my head back in the direction of the house and saw the 2 remaining zombies were getting closer. "Let me up."
"I won't let you shoot him,"
he said, his voice choked with tears.
"I won't."
"Let me up, damn it! Hurry!" My gun was a few feet from my face. He got off me, picked it up, and tucked it into his back pocket. I rolled away as fast as I could and got to my feet. The zombies were closer to him, and they both turned on him. Arguello moved quickly, stepping around the sergeant and firing one shot at the zombie in civilian clothes. That one folded to the ground instantly. But he didn't shoot the zombie sergeant. He wouldn't even point his gun at him. He let his gun fall to his thigh, and as the zombie got closer, he just stood there and cried, his whole chest shaking with sobs. "What are you doing?" I said. "Shoot him!" He turned his gun on me.
"You stay away from him. Stay away!"
The sergeant's face was torn to pieces. His neck was a gaping hole, and there was dried blood all down the front of his uniform. Arguello stood there, letting the zombie inch toward him. He didn't make any attempt to move out of the way. When the sergeant got close enough, I was able to read his name tag. It said Arguello, and I didn't need to ask any more questions after that. I knew there was a Sergeant Arguello, and I knew there was an Officer Arguello, but it never occurred to me that they were father and son. "You can't do anything for him," I said, my voice softer now that I understood.
"Shut up, Hudson."
"You have to protect yourself. No one can help him now. You have to look out for yourself."
"You don't know that. You don't know shit, Hudson. I can take him somewhere. Somebody can do something. Maybe they have a cure."
"He's too close to you," I said. "Back up." He didn't answer. He just cried. As calmly as I could, I reached up and grabbed him by the shoulder. He shook me off the first time, but then he let me pull him back. When I got him out of the way, the zombie turned on me. I backed up slowly and stepped away from Arguello, so the zombie would follow me instead. When I was far enough away from Arguello, I let the zombie reach for me. As his hands came up, I grabbed his right wrist and twisted it upwards, sidestepping around the body and pushing the back of his head with my other hand. It was easy to take him off balance, and I threw him face down on the ground with a standard armbar takedown. I've done the same move 1,000 times on 1,000 drunks. I came down on top of him with my knee on his back, wrenched his arm all the way up, and cuffed him as quickly as I could. It happened fast. As I slapped the other cuff on, I heard Arguello screaming at me, and I braced for the impact. He laid into me with his shoulder and sent me flying off the thing that used to be his father. The whole time he was screaming at me, but nothing I could understand. He was totally overcome with grief and rage, and there was no reaching him. As I scrambled out from under him, I saw his gun pointed at me. I slapped at him and with a lucky blow managed to knock the gun from his hands. He didn't bother to go after it. He charged me, bear-hugged me, and threw me to the ground. We both went down, kicking and punching. He was all over me. Every time I got a grip on him, he was able to break it and turn my weight against me. He swung his elbow up and caught me in the bottom of the lip. I saw purple and tasted blood. Then he tossed me to one side and I landed hard on my back. As I hit the ground, all I could see was a spot of ground lit up by my flashlight. He got to his feet first and charged me. I grabbed the flashlight and swung it at him, catching him hard under the jaw with a good solid stroke. He fell to his knees, bleeding, and I didn't wait for him to get up again. I swung the flashlight again and hit him right behind the ear. He fell backwards and stayed down. I staggered up to my feet, swaying all over the place. The yard was spinning so fast I had to double over and put my hands on my knees just to keep from falling over. "Holy crap," I said, wheezing through the blood. A long rope of bloody spit fell onto the ground between my boots. I picked up both guns from the ground, holstered mine, and unloaded his. Arguello had 6 rounds in the gun and a full magazine on his belt. I took the full magazine and put the magazine with the 6 bullets back in his belt. He rolled over and groaned, but was nowhere close to getting back on his feet. "Don't you hurt him, Hudson," he said. "I swear to God I'll fucking kill you." "I'm sorry," I said. "I really am." I threw his empty gun in the dust in front of him and walked back to the street. I could hear him yelling at me the whole time. There were zombies in the street. Not many at first, but enough to make a break for it into a suicide run. And there were more coming. Some of them stayed close to a nearby car, while others entered the yards on either side of me. I wondered briefly if Ken had seen this coming. I knew I wouldn't be able to make it to the car. They had surrounded it. I could have dodged some and shot some more, but there were so many of them they would have overwhelmed me long before I could get the car moving. I ran back between the houses. Some of the zombies were close enough to grab at me, but I was moving fast and their reaction time was slow. I never let them get a solid grip. Arguello was on his hands and knees trying to stand up. He had crawled part of the way across the yard, over to where his father was still trying to get back on his feet, but he hadn't gone very far from where I left him. I ran by him and took the back fence at full speed, jumping onto it and swinging myself over without bothering to look at what I was jumping into. As soon as I hit the ground, I froze. There were more zombies entering the yard from the next street, pouring into the backyard on both sides of the house. I looked to my right, prepared to move that way, but the next yard over was already overrun. I couldn't go back, and I couldn't go forward. Somehow I was surrounded, and I hadn't even seen it coming. My heart was hammering inside my chest. I backed up into the fence and looked around for I don't know what. There was a small storage shed back in the corner of the yard. I ran to it and jumped up on the roof. From the roof I could see the zombies pouring into the yard and surrounding Arguello. He was back on his feet, but he was still groggy, and he staggered as badly as the zombies. A group of them closed in on him. He picked his gun up and tried to fire, but nothing happened when he pulled the trigger. He stared at it stupidly for a moment before his training kicked in. Arguello came up with a magazine, slapped it into place, and pulled back on the slide, ready to shoot. The first shot wasn't even close. It hit high up on the corner of the house. The next shot hit one of the zombies in the shoulder. After that, he started firing wildly into the crowd, wasting all his ammunition. The zombies took him down and ripped him apart. But through it all, he never made a sound. "I'm sorry," I said. But I had problems of my own. I was completely surrounded. There were dozens of zombies slapping their hands against the sides of the shed, reaching for me. I pushed myself up to the highest part of the roof, looking everywhere for a way out. They couldn't reach me, at least not yet. But there were enough of them that the weight of their bodies pressing up against the shed could topple it over. They had already torn down a section of the wooden fence and were moving back and forth between the 2 yards. The yard where Arguello had just died was crowded with zombies. There were just as many around me. I couldn't go into either yard and expect to last very long. I turned around and around on the roof of that little shed, looking for a way out, but I kept seeing the same things and same shredded faces over and over again. As I turned, I slipped, and my knee hit the shingles. Off balance, I started to slide. I panicked, shot a hand out, and caught a corner of the roof. The suddenness of it caused my head to jerk up, and I managed to get a quick glimpse of the yard to the left of the one I was in. It wasn't more than 6 or 7 feet away, but I was so panicked I hadn't even seen it until just then. I counted 8 zombies. They were banging against the fence to get to me, but there weren't enough of them to break through. It was a way out. I thought if I could jump into that yard, I could hit the ground running and keep going. The only problem would be fighting off the zombies when I landed. But then I remembered I didn't have to fight them. All I had to do was shoot them. I had a pistol. There were almost 30 rounds in the gun. I could just pop them from where I was and jump into an empty yard. Piece of cake. But I hadn't figured on aiming while the zombies below me were rocking the shed. The distance to the target was no problem. My shooting wasn't the greatest, but 3 yards was pretty easy even for me. At least I thought it would be easy. It was like trying to shoot from a surfboard on choppy seas. Getting a clean headshot was hard, and I knew from past experience that it took too many body shots with a pistol to put even one zombie down. I put a lot of rounds into their faces and glanced a few off the sides of their heads, but I only got a kill shot every 6 or 7 shots I made. By the time I ran out of ammo, there were still 2 of them left on their feet, and the zombies below me were rocking the shed. It was getting harder and harder to keep my balance, and I knew that if I was going to make a break for it, it would have to be right then. It was the last, best chance. I crouched down like a sprinter at the gates and tried to focus on the jump. The yard below me was a seething carpet of faces and hands. I took a breath, forcing down the nausea and the fear, and jumped. One of the zombies grabbed me as I landed. We both tumbled to the ground, and I rolled off him. Once I was on my feet, I took off running and didn't stop until I was out in the street, all the zombies behind me. I stood there huffing, looking around in utter disbelief. I had heard people talk about mental exhaustion, about getting to that point when the mind refuses to go any further, but I had always thought it was just hyperbole. I didn't realize it was actually possible to get to that point. But even as I stood there, listening to the hordes behind me as they crashed through the fences like an approaching tidal wave, a little voice inside me pleaded for a little more. You've got to move. Ken Stoller's act of treachery had left me without a ride, and I felt like a doomed man, waiting for the gallows door to drop. The zombies were wandering back through the houses, and as I looked behind me, I saw more and more of them filtering into the street. You've got to move. Chapter 11. I ran for it. I passed dark, beat-up, clapboard houses that leaned in on themselves at unsafe-looking angles and sagged under the weight of years of neglect. Few were painted. Most were worn gray from the weather, and their porches looked like there was no way they could hold a man's weight. The yards were small, the grass thin and scraggly. They were strewn with old machine parts and junked cars. I ran down the center of the street because I didn't want to get boxed in again. With no ammunition, I had to avoid a fight. There was no way I would be able to fend off a whole crowd of zombies with just my baton. Even a small group of 20 or so would be able to overpower me. The zombies I had just escaped were blocking the street to the west, so I headed east. When I got to Appleton Street, I got my first good look at the highways. Appleton ran north-south across the near west side, then curved east and went straight up to the highway. Whenever I made arrests, Appleton was the street I used to get on the freeway for the drive downtown. From there it was a quick 5-minute car ride to the jail. I was used to running into traffic on Appleton because it was a major road, but I wasn't prepared at all for the mess waiting for me. The street was a bumper-to-bumper junkyard of abandoned cars. I looked up and down Appleton and saw cars crashed out all over the road. Off to the south, I could see most of them still had their headlights on, and they looked like cat's eyes. I used to enjoy watching the ebb and flow of traffic. It always fascinated me the way it pulsed, gathering up in knots at the stoplights and then spacing out again at the green, like the movement of blood through the body. San Antonio had once been a living entity, with vigor in its veins driven by the pulse of its streets. But now the streets that were the city's arteries and blood vessels were frozen. The blood congealed in the veins. The city itself had become a zombie, dying on its feet. I kept my head low and started checking the cars that looked like they could be driven away. Most of them were hung up in traffic and couldn't be moved, but I finally found an old beat-up Monte Carlo resting in the grass near the turnoff to a small side street. It looked like crap, but the keys were in it. The dashboard was covered in trash. I swept it off with my hand, and a little clear plastic baggie of marijuana fell onto the passenger seat. It caught my eye immediately, and it made me laugh, not because it was especially funny, but because of what it represented. Back when the world was normal, I'd search cars looking for stuff like that bag of weed. I used to find plenty of it, too. But as I looked around and saw how thoroughly the world had changed, that little bag of weed seemed a pathetic link to the way things used to be. I turned the key, but all I got was the lame whirling noise of a bad starter. I tried it again and got the same noise. "Come on, you piece of crap," I said. "Come on." I hit the steering wheel, mashed down on the gas. Nothing. The engine wouldn't turn. I saw a group of zombies moving through the back patio of a bar across the street, and they turned towards me when they heard the noise. There was one zombie out in front, moving faster than the others. I cranked the engine again and kept an eye on him. The Monte Carlo still wouldn't start, and the fast-moving zombie entered the street. In the time it took me to crank the car again, he was already across the street and banging out the passenger window. When he started around the front of the car, I stepped out and snapped my baton open. He came around the fender with his hands already reaching for me. I waited for him to get within striking distance, and then I dropped him with a full baseball bat-style swing to the side of his head. He landed face down in the grass and didn't get up again. But while I was fooling around with him, the others were getting closer. I got back in the car and kept cranking. There was nothing, and then all of a sudden the engine roared up. It was knocking and chugging, but it was running. One of the zombies grabbed at the windshield just as I dropped it into gear and took off. I caught his arm in the side-view mirror and spun him around violently. He landed in the grass next to the fast-moving zombie, and I was off before he could stand up again. I headed west for 2 blocks and then south again. Driving that Monte Carlo was a pain in the ass. The seat was busted. It was stuck as far back from the steering wheel as it would go, leaning into the back seat, so that I had to sit up with no back support just to keep control of the car. I didn't want to get it going too fast either, because every time I stepped on the brake it felt like I was stepping on a wet sponge. But I was lucky to have a car at all, I told myself, and I was lucky to have gotten away from Appleton Street with my life. I kept telling myself how lucky I was as I drove through wreckage that seemed to be getting worse. When I got to the intersection of Beaumont and Fletcher, I had to slow down to go around a wreck, and I just happened to look off to my right. There was a police car down there. I could tell right away that it was one of ours because it had the parking lights on. They train us to leave them on when we're out of the car, so we can see each other from a long way off in the dark. I turned the Monte Carlo toward the cruiser. When I pulled up, I saw that it was a traffic car. It had a video camera mounted on the inside of the windshield, and there were radar antennas all over the place. I walked around the police car. It was beautiful, not a scratch on it. Compared to the crap they give us on patrol, it was immaculate. There was even a brand-new shotgun in the trunk. Those bastards in traffic always get the best toys. I got in, cranked it up, and it purred like a kitten. Everything worked. It was strange to sit in a police car that didn't smell like sweat and oil and cheap air fresheners and a drunk's puke. There was even a little trash bag tied to the inside of the passenger door. I flipped on the PA speakers and said, "Can anyone hear this? If you can hear me, come out in the street." I was risking another zombie encounter by doing that, but if the traffic officer who was assigned to this car was anywhere around, I didn't want to leave him stranded. But no one came out. He was either dead or injured, and in either case I couldn't help him. I took Carlos's driver's license from my belt and placed it over the gauges on the dashboard. The car handled like a dream. On patrol we have to drive through fields and jump curbs and do all kinds of crazy things to our cars. But obviously traffic didn't do that kind of stuff. In no time at all, I had the windows down, and I was cruising down Fletcher Street towards Carlos's house. Chapter 12. Carlos's neighborhood was nicer than the neighborhoods I had just come from. As I turned into the main entrance, the streets seemed to open up. There were no cars on the curb, and no front yard fences to chop up the views. I saw open spaces and trees, and yards with green, healthy grass reaching all the way up to the front steps. They were old houses, but they were sturdy and well-maintained. "Well done, Carlos," I said to myself as I passed a rather impressive red brick house with a little fountain in the front yard. This neighborhood was a good catch on a policeman's salary. Maybe his wife worked, too. But the destruction had come to Carlos's neighborhood, too. Just off the main entrance, I saw a burnt Tudor-style house at one corner. I probably would have missed it completely if I hadn't seen one of the curtains billowing into the air like the swish of a girl's skirt. It floated on the breeze, sticking out of a charred hole where the kitchen window used to be. It seemed so sad and silent. And there were zombies here, too. They filtered into the street behind me as I drove by. None of them were a threat, though. The front yards were so big that I was halfway down the block before they could make it to the curb. Carlos's street wasn't all that different from any other in the neighborhood, except that there was a car crashed into the fence on the corner. The wooden slats of the fence were scattered around the yard like exploded matchsticks, and the back right tire was sticking up into the air. I turned my spotlight into the passenger area and saw a body slumped over the wheel. It wasn't moving. I stopped in front of Carlos's house. It was done up in gray brick and brown siding, with well-trimmed hedges lining the front of the house, and a black wrought-iron light pole in the garden. The light wasn't working. There were 3 large windows on the front of the house, and I turned the spotlight into each one of them, trying to see inside. There was no movement. The house was dark, and the spotlight didn't penetrate very far. I was hoping Carlos's wife would see the spotlight and come out on her own, but it didn't happen. I waited there in the car, looking around for more zombies, and wondering again if this was really such a good idea. Every minute I was away from April and Andrew was an invitation for something bad to happen to them. After all, I didn't even know Carlos's wife's name. But I had come this far already, hadn't I? Wasn't it worth the chance that maybe I could do something good for Carlos's family, even if I hadn't been able to do anything for him? The question seemed to me to answer itself, and so I threw the shotgun over my shoulder and started up the front walk. My flashlight beam wasn't much use either. I lit up the windows next to the front door, but couldn't see anything. The whole house seemed strangely quiet. Cops always talk about that feeling. What they mean is that sensation when the hairs stand up on the back of your neck and you just know a situation is about to get really fucked up. Imagine wading through the ocean and suddenly feeling something big brush against your leg. That's what that feeling feels like. And that's pretty much the feeling I had as I walked around the house. The back door was blasted open. It had been one of those sliding glass doors that I thought every cop knew better than to put on his house. Pieces of glass were everywhere, inside and out. The house was wide open, and I thought I saw blood on the carpet. It was hard to tell for sure because the carpet was a deep pile brownish maroon. All I knew for sure was that it was wet and sticky. The inside was split into 2 parts, with the kitchen, master bedroom, and dining room off to the left of the living room, and the smaller bedrooms off to the right. I started my sweep with the kitchen and worked back from there. As I entered the hallways leading off to the smaller bedrooms, I tightened up. There was blood on the carpet and more blood on the wall. I turned the corner into the first room I came to and saw baby clothes and toys all over the floor. A crib and a bookshelf were off near the back, and there was a changing station near the inside left corner, away from the door. Matthew was there, and there was blood on the changing pad and blood on the wall behind him. There was so much blood. And then it became abominable. He moved. His head lolled over, and he looked at me, eyes vacant and milky white like candle wax. I turned away. My head was swimming, and I staggered backwards from the changing station. The shotgun fell from my hands. My legs went weak and couldn't hold me. I half fell, half slid down the wall into a pile in the corner. I couldn't hang words on shock of that magnitude. As a parent looking at that torn little body, I felt such a deep sense of violation that I was unable to pull myself back from it. Surely this was hell, because nothing else could ever debase the human condition as much as the sight of an infant made into such a horrible thing. A few moments passed. I finally looked up at the changing pad again, and saw his arm hanging over the side, his hand grasping at the slick wooden paneling, unable to get a grip. And I wondered why it took something that horrible to convince me the world was dying. I would have preferred just about any death to this. Instead of a war or an asteroid or global warming, something that killed us from beyond ourselves. We were dying by implosion. I saw movement in the hallway. A woman's body fell against the door to the nursery. She was wearing a t-shirt and panties. Her legs were sliced up in 100 different randomly crossing angles. Blood was caked to her skin. Her hands and bottom jaw and the side of her head were torn open and black with infection. She stumbled into the room and stretched out her mangled hands to grab me. "What have you done?" I said, though I knew she couldn't answer me. Besides, we were well beyond the point where answers mattered. When she was close enough to put her hands on me, I pushed her aside and stood up behind her. If there had been more range, I could have used the beanbags, but we were very close together, and at less than 5 feet shooting someone with a beanbag is basically the same as shooting them with a really big bullet. The effect is the same, anyway. I didn't want to risk splattering her blood all over me, not after what Ken had told me, so instead of shooting her, I punched the back of her head with the butt of the shotgun. She went down, but not for good. I didn't do enough damage. When she tried to get up, I swung the butt of the shotgun down and put her away once and for all. Then I went over to Matthew's body and tried to do the same thing to him. But I couldn't do it. I stood over his small body with the shotgun raised over my head, and I kept telling myself that he was just a husk. But I couldn't do it. I took the coward's way out. I went to the garage and got the gas can Carlos used for the lawnmower. I poured it out on the carpet and on Carlos's wife, and threw a lit candle into the middle of the room. The fire caught hold, and I walked out of the house, leaving the flames to take their course. Chapter 13. I thought maybe the house would blow up behind me as I drove away, something dramatic like that. The truth is, I didn't even know if that kind of thing worked in real life. I've handled plenty of house fires, but I've never seen a house blow up like they do in the movies. All I could do was hope the fire did take hold, and that mother and child were burned up in it. If there is such a thing as small mercies, then that is what happened. But I don't know for sure. I took off down the street and never looked back. As I drove away, I tried to make myself believe there was a sense of closure in their deaths. They wouldn't have to live without Carlos, and Carlos wouldn't have to live without them. But even as I tried to convince myself that there was something good in what I'd seen, I knew I was being foolish. There was nothing good at all about it, and any attempt I could make to somehow put a good spin on it was just more moral cowardice. I focused on the street lamps. They weren't working, but counting them was a mind-numbing diversion. I glided past them without having to think about problems that made my head hurt. I drove on until I got to Crane Street. Crane was another major cross street for the highway, and it was jammed up in the same horrible way Appleton had been. The only difference was that from Crane Street, I could look down on the highway, and it gave me a good view of the intersection and the highway beyond it. All the traffic was clogged up in the outgoing lanes, but the incoming lanes were empty. From the looks of it, all those people had tried to get out of town at the same time. The traffic jam was predictable. As soon as someone's car broke down or there was an accident, the flow shut down behind it like a clogged drain. Every single person stuck in the breakdown had been forced to foot it, and they were probably all dead or worse. Not one person in that whole doomed parade had been able to think outside of their mental box and simply drive the wrong way up the highway. As I drove up the exit ramp, passing all the red signs that said "Wrong way, do not enter," I remembered what my driving instructor at the police academy used to tell us. "The road is not a mandate," he had said, standing on a picnic table in the middle of the academy's driving track. "It's merely a suggestion." It felt strange to drive the wrong way on the highway, even though mine seemed to be the only car moving. I kept expecting a huge truck to come barreling over the next hill and smear me across the pavement, but I went for miles without seeing any movement at all. I wasn't far from my house when I saw the police car lights still flickering on the other side of the retaining wall. When I got close enough to see that it was one of ours, I pulled alongside it and put a light on it. I recognized the driver.